What if I told you that the main enemy of settlers in the Wild West was not armed bandits or wild animals? The real threat awaited them every night inside their own homes, when the sun disappeared behind the horizon and the temperature dropped rapidly. The most dangerous place in a pioneer's cabin was the floor, which by morning would turn into an icy trap capable of destroying health and even life. In conditions where snowstorms raged outside, the thin walls and firewood was often in short supply. Sleep became a daily test of survival. They had to invent incredible ways to stay warm, turning everyday objects into life-saving tools. Watch the video to the end to find out how an ordinary potato could save your toes from frostbite and why old newspapers were more valuable to vagrants than gold. What if I told you that the comforts of home we take for granted were an unattainable luxury for the first settlers? The biggest problem with any log cabin or hut on the frontier was the floor, which often became a conduit for deadly cold. Most of the first dwellings had no floor at all, and people simply walked on compacted earth. Despite its simplicity, the earthen floor had the terrible property of drawing heat from any object that came into contact with it. Even if a fire was burning in the hearth, the temperature at ground level could drop below zero, causing the water in buckets to freeze. Those who could afford wooden flooring used so-called planks, logs split in half and laid flat side up. These rough boards rarely fit tightly together, leaving wide gaps between them. Through these gaps, cold air constantly flowed into the living quarters from the crawl space, where an icy wind blew. The cold accumulated at the bottom, creating an invisible but palpable pool of icy air half a meter above the floor. Sleeping on such a surface was equivalent to lying down in a snowdrift, so the main task was to get as high as possible. That is why the first beds of the pioneers were tall and cumbersome structures resembling scaffolding. The bed frame was often built directly into the corner of the house, using the log walls as support to save wood. The legs were made of thick logs, raising the sleeping area to the level of an adult's waist. This elevation allowed them to be in the zone of warmer air, which, as we know, rises upward. There was free space under the bed, which was never empty and was used to store chests and utensils. The bed itself was made of intertwined ropes or rawhide straps stretched between the sides of the frame. These ropes had to be tightened regularly with a special wooden wrench as they sagged over time. The rigid mesh served as a base for the mattress, but did not provide any warmth itself. It was merely an engineering trick that allowed one to physically distance oneself from the icy source below. However, even at such a height, the cold from the walls continued to penetrate to the bone, requiring additional protective measures. Lone hunters and trappers who spent the night in temporary shelters could not always build a high bed. They had to use spruce branches, laid in a thick, springy layer directly on the snow or frozen ground. This layer created an air cushion that insulated the body from direct contact with the cold surface. The thicker the layer of branches, the greater the chance of waking up in the morning healthy and able to continue on the journey. It was a primitive but effective method borrowed from indigenous peoples. Sometimes in the harshest conditions, wooden boxes filled with dry leaves or moss were used. A person would literally bury themselves in this box, creating a thermos effect around themselves. The walls of the box protected against drafts, and the filling retained the heat emitted by the body. It was like sleeping in a large nest, where comfort was sacrificed for the sake of survival. Such methods took time to prepare, but in the wild, rushing could be too costly. In more inhabited houses, the space under a high bed was often closed off with thick curtains or boards. This was done not so much for beauty as to reduce the circulation of cold air under the sleepers. The result was a kind of insulated compartment where the air was slightly less mobile and, therefore, less cold. Sometimes dogs were allowed to sleep under the bed at night, their bodies serving as living heaters. The fight against the cold began with an understanding of simple physics. Contact with the floor kills. Every 10 centimeters of height above ground level added precious degrees of warmth. The pioneers quickly learned that low bunks were a path to pneumonia and rheumatism. Their sleeping places were their fortresses, towering above the icy sea that covered the floor of their dwelling. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on such Spartan conditions. Could you sleep on a rope net at -30 degrees? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about what was really hidden inside the beds that generations slept on? We are used to soft spring mattresses and orthopedic foam, but for the pioneers, a tightly stuffed tick was the limit of their dreams. A tick was a large bag made of thick cotton fabric that matched the size of the bed frame. This bag was the main element of the sleeping system, and the quality of sleep and the amount of heat retained depended on its filling. The most common filling for such mattresses was ordinary straw left over after threshing grain. Straw was available, free, and had good thermal insulation properties due to the tubular structure of the stems. Fresh straw smelled pleasantly of the field and created a high, elastic layer in which one could settle comfortably. However, over time, the stalks broke down into dust and the mattress became hard and lumpy. Therefore, once a year, usually after the harvest, the contents of the tick were completely shaken out and replaced with new ones. An even more popular material, especially in the South and in corn-growing areas, was dry corn husks. They were carefully selected, dried, and torn into narrow strips to make the filling softer and more uniform. Corn leaves were more durable than straw and held their shape better under the weight of the human body. Such a mattress could last for several years, requiring only periodic fluffing through a special slit in the fabric. However, corn mattresses had one significant drawback that is rarely mentioned in novels. They made an incredible noise with every movement of the sleeper, rustling and creaking with dry leaves. If the whole extended family slept in one room, any turn from side to side by one person would wake up everyone else. It took months to get used to this sound, perceiving it as an inevitable background noise of nightlife. On the other hand, this filling provided excellent insulation from the cold coming from below. For those who wanted more comfort and warmth, there was an elite option, a goose or duck-down feather bed. Collecting down took years. Housewives plucked live birds at certain seasons, collecting soft undercoat gram by gram. A feather bed was not just a mattress, but a real family asset, which was passed down to daughters as a dowry. It was incredibly warm, as the down created thousands of microscopic air pockets that retained body heat. But even owners of luxurious feather beds often placed them on top of a rough straw mattress. The straw underneath served as insulation from the cold air and drafts coming through the rope mesh of the bed. The down provided softness and enveloping warmth on top, creating a sandwich effect. This combination was considered ideal for harsh winters, when the temperature in the house could drop below zero by morning. Caring for such bedding was hard physical labor that fell on the shoulders of women. Every morning, the mattresses had to be beaten and turned over so that the filling would not clump together and lose its properties. On sunny days, the beds were taken outside to air out to get rid of dampness and odors. It was a never-ending battle to preserve the volume and elasticity that determined the warmth at night. In addition, natural fillings attracted unwanted guests who sought warmth just as much as humans did. Small rodents could gnaw through the ticking and make a nest right inside the mattress, among the straw. Therefore, regular inspection of the bed was a mandatory ritual before bedtime to make sure you would be sleeping there alone. The use of dry herbs such as wormwood or lavender helped repel insects and created a pleasant aroma. Sleeping on a straw or corn mattress is a special art that requires skill. You had to be able to make a small depression, a nest, in the center and not slide to the edges. If the mattress was stuffed too tightly, it turned into a rounded hill from which it was easy to fall. If it was too loose, the body sank down to the hard ropes of the frame. These simple bags filled with plant debris were the only barrier between a person and the icy breath of the night. They rustled, pricked, and required constant care. But without them, survival in winter would have been impossible. Could you sleep to the loud crunch of dry corn leaves? I will reveal the most closely guarded secret that allowed survival in the open steppe without firewood or coal. In the Great Plains, where there was not a single tree for hundreds of miles around, it was impossible to build a classic log cabin. Here, the pioneers turned to the experience of the indigenous peoples and nature itself, creating dwellings that used the earth as the main insulator. Dugouts and sod houses became a symbol of ingenuity, where the soil itself acted as a giant heat accumulator. The principle of such dwellings was based on the geothermal properties of the soil. At a depth of 1.5 meters, the temperature of the earth remains relatively constant throughout the year, without freezing in winter or overheating in summer. Pioneers dug pits directly into the slope of a hill or dug into the flat surface of the steppe. The walls of such a house were infinitely thick because they were served by the planet itself, reliably protecting against the piercing winds. The roof of the dugout was made of a thick layer of turf, layers of grass intertwined with roots, cut like bricks. This green ceiling had phenomenal insulating properties, keeping the heat inside the room. In winter, when blizzards raged outside and temperatures dropped to critical levels, the dugout remained at a stable above zero temperature. A small hearth was enough to heat the space to a livable temperature. In such houses, the floor was often left earthen, but it was carefully tamped down and covered with a layer of clay mixed with ash. After drying, this mixture became as hard as concrete and could even be swept. The clay floor, being below the level of soil freezing, was itself a source of relative warmth. It did not freeze the feet like a wooden floor in a ground house exposed to all winds. Thick walls made of turf, laid with the grass facing down for better adhesion, played a special role in thermoregulation. The width of such a wall could reach a meter, which created an insurmountable barrier to the cold. During the day, these walls slowly accumulated heat from the stove or the sun shining through small windows. At night, when the fire in the stove went out, the walls began to release the accumulated heat back into the room, smoothing out temperature fluctuations. Inside such dwellings, a special microclimate with high humidity was always maintained. This was beneficial for the respiratory tract in the dry climate of the steppes, but required a constant battle against mold. Nevertheless, humid air retains heat better than dry air, which was an additional factor for survival. People lived in essence inside the living organism of the earth, breathing and warming them with its heat. To sleep in dugouts, niches were often made directly in the earthen walls, covering them with skins or blankets. Such a sleeping place, surrounded on all sides by soil, resembled a cozy burrow. Body heat was retained much better in such a confined space than in a large open room. It was psychologically difficult, but physically the warmest way to spend the night. Of course, life in a dugout had its drawbacks. Earth could fall from the ceiling, and the roof leaked when it rained. But in the bitter cold, when the mercury in the thermometer froze, it was these primitive burrows that saved thousands of families from certain death. They were warmer than the much vaunted wooden houses, which were drafty through the cracks between the logs. This experience of using the thermal inertia of the earth was later applied in the construction of vegetable storage facilities and ice houses. But initially, it was a survival technology for people who had nothing but a shovel and the endless steppe beneath their feet. Sod houses proved that sometimes a step back to a cave-like existence can be a step towards salvation. Thanks to this method, settlers were able to survive winters that killed livestock left out in the open. The earth was their blanket, their wall, and their stove. This ingenious use of natural laws is still admired today. Don't forget to like this if you were surprised by this technology. Guess how much the only blanket capable of defeating death in the icy steppe weighed? When ordinary woolen blankets and patchwork quilts proved powerless against the Arctic cold, nature came to the rescue. The main treasure and lifeline for any frontier dweller was a bison hide, or as it was called, a buffalo robe. This hide was not just an everyday item, but real armor against the cold, unmatched by any man-made material. The bison hide had unique properties. Its thick, curly fur created a dense air layer that perfectly retained heat. The bison skin was thick and durable, completely windproof, working like a modern membrane. One such skin could weigh more than 10 kilograms, and covering yourself with it was like covering yourself with a heavy carpet. But it was this weight that gave a feeling of security and pressed the edges tightly together, preventing cold air from blowing under the blanket. The secret to using bison hides was to position them correctly. Experienced trappers and Native Americans always placed one hide with the fur facing up under themselves and covered themselves with the second hide with the fur facing inwards. This created a cocoon in which a person was sandwiched between two layers of thick fur. The lower skin insulated against the cold of the ground or bed, and the upper skin reflected body heat back. Even in the most severe frost, the temperature inside such a cocoon remained above zero. Trappers who went into the mountains to hunt often used the double skin tactic to sleep directly on the snow. They wrapped themselves in a huge skin with their heads inside, leaving only a tiny hole for breathing. Moisture from their breath settled as frost on the outer pile, creating an additional crust that sealed the heat inside. In the morning, they had to break this snow cocoon from the inside to get out. Tanning hides was a complex and laborious process, mainly carried out by tribal women or the wives of settlers. An improperly tanned hide became as stiff as plywood and broke in the cold. A high-quality robe was soft, elastic, and could last for decades, being passed down from father to son. A good skin was expensive, but on the frontier it was valued more than money. In addition to bison, bear, wolf, and even sheep skins were used, sewing them into large sheets. Bear skin was considered particularly warm and waterproof, but it was much more difficult and dangerous to obtain. Sheepskin was more accessible to farmers. Sheepskins were sewn with the fur inside, creating primitive sleeping bags. Such a bag was cramped, but it allowed you to warm up with your own body heat much faster. Interestingly, old skins with worn-out fur were not thrown away. They were used to cover doorways and windows, creating additional barriers against drafts. Bald patches of skin were rubbed with fat to maintain elasticity and windproof properties. Every piece of skin was used to insulate the home. In families where there were not enough skins for everyone, they were placed on top of ordinary blankets as a finishing layer. The heavy leather pressed down on the light patchwork blankets, preventing them from slipping, and created an impenetrable dome over the sleepers. Under such pressure, the children slept motionless but warm, heated by their collective breath. Unfortunately, with the extermination of the bison, this invaluable resource began to disappear, forcing settlers to look for a replacement. But in the golden age of Western expansion, it was the shaggy giant of the prairies that gave people the opportunity to survive the night. The bison blanket was a symbol of status, experience, and a chance for survival. Could you fall asleep under the weight of a 10-kilogram hide smelling of wild animals and smoke? When external insulation was not enough, pioneers used active heat sources that they placed directly in their beds. This method was a lifesaver in homes where the walls were almost completely frozen through. It made the cold nighttime space more tolerable and turned sleep into something resembling rest. People knew that without additional heat, it was almost impossible to fall asleep. Therefore, these tricks became a daily necessity. Even children participated in preparing for the night by helping to gather materials. It was a simple but effective way to turn a cold bed into a cozy place before going to sleep. Pioneers valued such solutions for their accessibility and reliability. No one needed to buy expensive things. Everything was made from what was at hand. Simple objects took on new meaning when it got cold. Every evening turned into a small ritual of fighting the cold. This is how the culture of home warmth was formed. The most common heat accumulators were ordinary river stones or bricks, which were turned into heat accumulators every evening. These items were everywhere, so they were considered the best solution for poor families. Stones retained heat well and withstood daily heating. Bricks were also reliable helpers, especially if the house was built from them. People quickly learned to choose stones of the right size. This method of heating became commonplace. The process of preparing for bed began long before lights out. The family usually gathered around the hearth to prepare the night heaters. The hostess estimated in advance how much heat each person would need, depending on the weather. Sometimes it was necessary to heat not 2, but 5 stones. During cold weeks, this ritual was repeated daily. Everyone's comfort at night depended on it. The hostess placed several large smooth stones or burnt bricks on the edge of the hearth or in the oven. This stage required attention because some stones heated up too quickly, while others heated up slowly. The stones had to be turned over in time to heat them evenly. This was often monitored by children who were learning the intricacies of the task from adults. Preparing the stones became part of the evening routine. It brought the family together around the fire. The stones had to be thoroughly heated, but not red hot so as not to burn the laundry. Only experienced housewives knew this delicate balance. An overheated stone could have terrible consequences and destroy all the family's possessions. Therefore, women constantly checked the temperature with their hands from a distance. Such control required skill and caution. Without it, heating the bed was dangerous. It required experience and attention, as an overheated stone could cause a fire. Even a small spark could lead to disaster in cramped wooden houses. People understood that they had to follow the rules to preserve their homes. Therefore, they always used only proven methods. Sometimes neighbors shared recommendations on how best to heat the stones. Such an exchange of experience was an important part of community life. Heated objects were never placed in bed uncovered. This was an unwritten rule that everyone followed. An uncovered stone could burn or scorch fabric in seconds. Therefore, any object was carefully wrapped and checked. Only then was it allowed to be placed under the blanket.
Sleep well.
The perfection of this method saved people from injury. They were carefully wrapped in several layers of old flannel, wool, or even newspaper. The thicker the layer of fabric, the slower the stone cooled. Such wrapping allowed the heat to be stretched out for many hours. Old or unwanted items were given a new lease on life thanks to this purpose. Fabrics were selected specifically for hot water bottles. Every home kept such rag blanks. This wrapping served a dual purpose. It protected the feet from burns and slowed down the release of heat, causing the stone to stay warm longer. People discovered this in practice when they tried different materials. Thin fabrics did not retain heat, while thick ones made the heating weak. Therefore, a delicate balance was required. Each home found its own ideal option. It became a small science. The bundle was placed at the foot of the bed under the blanket half an hour before bedtime to warm up the cold sheets. During this time, the bed became much softer and warmer. People waited for the warmth to spread throughout the entire length of the blanket. Sometimes 2 bundles were made for children to warm them up faster. This created a feeling of care and tranquility. The warmed bed became an oasis for the night ahead. So-called soapstones, talc chloride, were especially popular. This stone was mined in certain places and was considered valuable because of its ability to retain heat for a long time. It was soft enough to be shaped into a comfortable form. People often passed such stones down as heirlooms. They were considered family treasures. Talc chloride was a real luxury. This mineral had unique heat capacity, was easy to work with, and stayed warm for a long time. Even a small bar could give off heat for hours. It was kept in the oven longer than ordinary stones to achieve the perfect heat. Such stones were used most often in winter. They were especially valuable in harsh climates. The warmth they provided was considered almost magical. What if I told you that the habit of sleeping in a hat was not a fashion statement, but a matter of survival? We are used to seeing nightcaps in cartoons or old fairy tales, but for frontier people, it was a critically important item of clothing. In a cold room where the air temperature was not much different from the outside temperature, the head was the only part of the body not covered by a blanket. Heat loss through an uncovered head could be enormous, leading to hypothermia of the entire body. Nightcaps were made of soft wool, flannel, or thick cotton. Men's models often had a long conical end with a tassel that could be wrapped around the neck like a scarf. Women's caps fit snugly around the head, covered the ears, and were tied under the chin to prevent them from slipping off during sleep. This simple headdress created a microclimate around the head and protected the ears from frostbite. Sleepwear was generally multi-layered. No one undressed completely. A long nightshirt made of brushed flannel was worn over underwear. Flannel was the ideal material, soft, warm, and absorbent. Thick woolen socks were a must, sometimes even 2 pairs. People often slept in their daytime clothes, loosening their belts only if the cold was unbearable. But the most effective way to keep warm was to use collective heat. The concept of personal space disappeared in winter. 3, 4, or even 5 people often slept in one bed. Children were laid across the bed at their parents' feet or in tight rows. like sardines in a can. The warmth of their bodies stacked together created a powerful heater capable of withstanding any frost. There was a custom of bundling, when even guests or suitors could sleep in the same bed with the hosts, fully clothed and separated by a special board or pillow. This had no sexual connotations, but was a harsh necessity. Leaving a guest to sleep alone on the floor meant condemning them to illness. Warmth was a resource that had to be shared. Before going to bed, it was essential to do physical exercises to get the blood flowing. Jumping, rubbing your hands and feet, and doing quick squats all helped you get into bed already warmed up. Going to bed cold was a mistake. A cold body could not warm up a cold bed, and you risked shivering until morning. They covered themselves head to toe, leaving only a small tunnel for air to enter. This allowed them to breathe warm air and not lose moisture. However, by morning, the blanket in the breathing area was covered with a crust of frost from condensation. Shaking off this frost was the first task in the morning. Such closeness during sleep strengthened family ties, but also contributed to the rapid spread of colds. If one person got sick, everyone got sick, but there was no choice. Loneliness in an icy house was deadly dangerous. A nightcap, woolen socks, and the warmth of a loved one's shoulder nearby. These were the three pillars on which the pioneers' sleep rested. These people knew the value of warmth and knew how to preserve it with every thread of their clothing. How comfortable do you think it was to sleep in a cramped pile of 5 people, even if it saved your life? Once the bed was prepared and the body was warm, the main problem remained: drafts. Log cabins, as romantic as they may seem, were full of cracks. The wood dried out, settled, and gaps formed between the logs.